Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Liz Bothwell from Waste 360 with Jeff Kendall, Managing Director at Laurel Mountain Partners. Welcome, Jeff, and thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, good morning.
So, Jeff, please tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in our wonderful industry.
I worked with an investment bank in Pittsburgh, a public finance investment bank, who discovered they could finance with tax-exempt bonds solid waste assets. And they first did a very large waste energy facility in Chester, and then developed a landfill outside of Pittsburgh and sold it for a very good profit to Mid-American Waste back in the late 80s. So two of the senior partners, Andy Russell and Don Ray, and myself left and basically started focusing on opportunities in the solid waste business. So that's how we entered, really coming out of the world of finance. And so that's how we got started.
Great. And you've been involved in hundreds of deals across the industry. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on what's different now than, say, 10 to 20 years ago around deals.
Sure. I mean, we did our first consolidation play in the mid-90s in Chicago, Central and Southern Illinois, and we acquired companies in Indiana as well. And there were just a whole lot more opportunities then than there are today. Multiples were a little lower, but in the mid to late 90s, they were pretty high, but lower than today. I mean, today seems to be maybe the highest that I've ever seen in the last 25 years in terms of just sort of your typical multiples. So there are fewer deals left today. People are actually, I think, quite smartly, people that are left. A lot of people are looking at selling, but the number of deals, I think, is the big difference. There were a lot of small haulers and privately owned landfills back when we first started, and you'd be hard pressed to find a very good sort of independently owned landfill around a major city. Few and far between, aside from being owned by some of the larger independents. The rest are owned by the publics.
And you do feel like some of the smaller ones are more open to deals now than, say, they were back when you first started?
Well, no, I think there were a lot more, so you could definitely find people in those days. I just think actually today, because the multiples are so high, that's why you're seeing a continued robust acquisition by particularly the big guys, because the prices are so high. You have a good cap gain rate still, so if you're thinking about selling, now is definitely the time to do it.
That makes sense. So how do you evaluate companies nowadays? I'm sure our listeners on both sides of the deal equation would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, the way we look at it, I mean, we oftentimes, like we are actually right now, we're just sort of looking around for something to do. We sold our last consolidation play to Waste Connections in April, and so we're looking around, and so oftentimes we hear about development deals that are sort of near the end and need a final push over the finish line, and maybe someone who can bring our the various skills we have to help finish. And so, I actually have a meeting later today with a group of that sort. So, a lot of times people call us. So we, evaluate that particular opportunity. We usually like to find where there's multiple things to do in the area. So, we're not looking to really just buy one company. We're looking to say, okay, what are the opportunities to build something special, interesting in a market area. We've never sort of developed a business or a company where, we have one asset in Telluride, Colorado, and another in Charleston, South Carolina. So it's more, we're much more concentrated when we do begin to build a business.
That makes sense.
There are a lot of aspects to sort of what you would buy relative to the price you pay, the quality of the assets, the opportunities to improve. So there, I could give you a long list of considerations, but they wouldn't be that different in terms of how we would look for a business than typical sort of buyer, experienced buyer.
Sure. And do you think the strong economy has accelerated growth in companies of all sizes and in the different sectors in the waste industry?
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, the industry is probably in better shape than it's ever been, best I can tell, since we've been involved since the late '80s. People, the big guys are pushing price and really working hard on their margins. And they all have very good margins, and they're all run by, in terms of the big publics, by very sober and experienced people. So you don't have any of the craziness of the '90s and '80s where a lot of companies were forced to redo their books based upon sort of flawed accounting and flawed acquisition strategies. The companies are much more solid now, and that trickles down to small guys like us, and we begin to focus on and have the opportunity to focus on things like increasing our margins, raising our prices, and the rising tide does lift all boats. I would say the only concern about today from an acquisition standpoint would be that firms that have a large bent in the roll-off side of things, they tend to have done very well because of the growth. You look at a lot of high-growth cities like, say, Austin and Nashville and others. I mean, they have some very strong roll-off companies because the growth has been so great. But they would be scary acquisitions at any kind of high price because their revenues could drop dramatically with a recession or with an overbuilding in a market. I mean, and it's definitely going to happen at some point.
Sure. And what advice do you wish all business owners knew? What do you think their top priorities should be in growing their business?
Well, I think that they should start out with safety. We've acquired, let's say, 125 companies or more, and not one of these small companies had a good safety program. It's kind of amazing to me. So I would focus, and we always do, is focus first on safety. So there's a good set of reasons to do that. One is obviously the human reason, and to make sure people go home in the same condition that they can arrive at work. It's a tough job. It's a dangerous job. If you ever just gotten in and out of a truck, I mean, I'm amazed we don't get more sprained ankles. Where most of the it's kind of a hop to get out of the cab. If you're doing rear load work and you're shoving containers around, if you're picking up garbage for residential garbage and throwing it, this is just a tough job. And so being focused on safety for the right reasons is a very, very good thing. It has value in terms of if you are safe, you are going to treat your equipment better. You're going to have less cost relative to injuries and accidents. So it has an effect that goes beyond just taking care of your folks. But if you start there and you focus on your people and you take care of them, you make sure they're practicing, doing good, using good practices, in their daily work. That would be the first thing I'd focus on. The second thing I think would be on, equipment maintenance and preventative maintenance, and making sure you have your equipment, good equipment on the road. If you're in the collection business, you don't want to worry about whether your trucks are going to run. You want to worry about whether you're servicing your equipment. An old friend of mine, Dirk Ball, who had owned Evergreen Scavenger for 40 years till we bought him out in '97. He had what looked like a kind of a shabby situation in Evergreen Park in South Chicago in terms of his site, but his trucks were all perfect. And, he sort of taught me that motto, and, we've tried to stick with it and always have a good equipment, maintain it well, service it well, and, helps obviously with customer service and helps with safety as well.
Sure.
I can give you a list. How far do you want me to go down the list?
Well, those two are pretty good. And I wonder as well, the value side of the proposition. Do you find they should really tout the service side of their business over their pricing because it does become a commodity business? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think folks should not just focus. They need to focus not just on safety, but making money. And because you can't be sustainable if you don't have a good margin, and you don't have cash flow to repair your equipment, to pay your folks. And so, you shouldn't get in business and try to run a business on a thin margin. It's not sustainable. And I would say anything under 20% begins to get to be unsustainable in terms of an EBITDA margin. So you need the free cash flow. Obviously, you need to, you may have some debt. You've got to pay your people well. You've got to repair your equipment. I'm being repetitive, and I apologize. But so, sure, customer service is extremely important. It's basic, but you also have to charge. And a lot of times people are fearful about raising their prices for losing a client to competitor. But you can do an analysis, and it's not that hard to do. And it sort of goes something like this, that you raise your prices 10%, lose 20% of your clients, and you're more profitable. So people need to demand to get paid for the services they're providing. These are difficult services. They're important, and they're expensive in terms of the equipment and manpower. So they cannot be shy about charging for this service.
Right, that makes sense. And it looks like you've been very involved in the operations and financing side of landfills as well. Have you run into any sort of not in my backyard type of resistance or any similar political issues along the way?
We developed a large landfill in eastern Ohio, Apex, still out there, and we built a rail transloading facility in South Kearney, New Jersey, and bought all the equipment and rail cars and all of that sort of thing, and actually developed into what still exists today is a unit train that goes from Kearney to on Norfolk Southern to Apex landfill every day. So 5,000 tons a day, our own train back and forth every day. And we also at the same time developed a landfill, a C&D landfill sort of north of Apex that took rail in C&D from a variety of places in New Jersey, New York. We, when you bring in construction demolition waste, you get a lot of wallboard. It gets crunched down, and then when combined with oxygen and water, it can produce hydrogen sulfide smell. Well, at the C&D landfill, and we had some similar experiences over at the MSW landfill, but I think it's more extreme at the C&D, where we would carefully cover it every day that would then contain the smell. So we didn't really have smell issues. But at one point we were doing some construction of a new cell. We peeled off a layer of dirt. We had a lot of smell. Neighbors complained. We immediately shut the landfill down, recovered it, eliminated the smell. But the neighbors used that as an opportunity to cry wolf to the head of the DEP and the governor, and they continually lied. And we actually would run around with measuring devices that would be like right next to somebody's house while they were calling the DEP complaining, and we would show no smell. So we cured the problem, but their continual complaints, and the DEP didn't really like, or the Ohio EPA didn't really like us railing garbage in that much anyhow. They continued to restrict what we could do at the point where we really weren't making any money. So we actually finally just shut the landfill down and closed it, which was an expensive process, but it was very unfair. I used to always think that work hard, do the right thing, and everything will be fine. But I learned the other lesson is that you cannot fight City Hall. And when you had a very
Right.
liberal head of the Ohio EPA essentially accepting complaints that were absolute baloney, that can be very dangerous. So you don't want to get your neighbors upset, and if you do, you want to solve it right away. We should have probably bought a few neighbors out in hindsight and could have just gotten rid of them because they were untruthful. But anyhow, it was a lesson learned, and once things get riled up in an area around a landfill, it's hard to calm them down.
Right. I've heard that and understand that, living in all of our communities. So it sounds like you did the ultimate thing that you could do at that point. Your hands were tied.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't fair. It wasn't reasonable. But life moves on. We did learn a lesson, and that is, as I say, don't let people get riled up, and if they do, solve it right away. And we always try to do that, and sometimes even as we did there, we solved it. But even that can be not enough. So it's we've run into political issues.
I'm sure you've seen a lot. And so I read that when you were CEO of Liberty Waste and Liberty Tire, you successfully operated and sold around 100 companies. That's astounding, Jeff. Could you dive a little bit deeper into that experience? And a side note to that, the tire recycling, is it still as booming as it was a couple of years ago? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So we've done, roughly a half a dozen what I'd call consolidation plays, and they all started out sort of, as an opportunity and with no particular end game in sight. I mean, Liberty, what we call now Liberty Waste One, we had a PNC as our equity partner, Comerica, who has always been our senior lender, as our banker, and we acquired, let's say, some 25 companies around Chicago and other parts of Illinois and Indiana. And we were raising private equity to expand. And we were pretty much done when Rich DeYoung of American Disposal, small public company at the time, made us an offer to buy us that was something we couldn't refuse. So ultimately, Allied closed that deal because they bought American first. But so it wasn't. We were really never planning on selling. We were building a company. We were excited about it, and but we recognized that sometimes you can move on and go to other locales. Liberty 2 was actually a joint venture with Waste Industries, where they provided sub-debt. We borrowed money from Comerica, built companies, acquired and developed landfills, hauling companies, transfer stations in Tennessee and Mississippi, with the idea that Lonnie, Waste Industries, would buy us out at some point. But before we got to that point, Lonnie, that's kind of interesting, in 2001, called and said, hey, he could use his money back. And so we put the company up for sale prior to when we wanted to get him his money back. And we sold it to Waste Connections. That's when they came east Mississippi. Liberty 3 evolved into Liberty Tire, keep the long story short. And so with Liberty Tire, we first acquired a couple companies in the scrap tire business in North Carolina, great companies. We really were suspicious about being in the industry. It generally had been a lot of fallout in the 90s. But what happened in the 90s is people left when they got into the 2000s, actually were the survivors and had pretty decent businesses, and some of them dominant business. So we started, basically consolidating that industry. We bought 40% of North America's scrap tire recycling capacity and collection. And so we did about 140 million tires, and they still do a year, about 500,000 tires a day. And no, the recycling business is good. I mean, the company is doing well, under great leadership, and the industry is fine. It's not really that. It's a very hard business compared to garbage. You just have a lot of moving parts, creating a lot of different products to sort of move the rubber. I mean, you get, you're at a site and you get 20,000 tires in every day. You've got to deal with those 20,000 tires. You can't just. You've got to process them, because 20,000 tires is a big pile in a hurry. And where people have been unsuccessful is they either didn't deal with the tires coming in, or they shredded, made big piles, and couldn't get rid of the product going out the door. So you have to meet markets, you have to evaluate it. So with Liberty, we had a very robust operations planning, so we could decide, connected with sales, what are we going to sell, what do we think we're going to sell, what should we make, et cetera. So it's a complex business, much more complex than you might think, but it was a lot of fun as well. Our fourth project was the rail project I mentioned, and our last consolidation play was one in Omaha and Indiana. I'm sorry, Illinois and Iowa and Nebraska, and it was pretty typical of what we've done: landfills, hauling companies, transfer stations, and Waste Connections bought that in April. That long-winded answer accurately completely answers your question.
No, that's great. And did you ever successfully donate the recycled tires to Heinz Field, or did they decide not to take you up on that?
Well, it's quite ironic because my brother-in-law is Art Rooney, and every Thanksgiving we have a big family get together, and I would say to him, "When are you going to get rid of this turf and go to artificial turf?" And I'll never forget the Miami game. Sort of prior to Thanksgiving, it was raining like crazy, and the punter hit a punt, and it stuck in the ground in the wet turf. I thought for sure it happened that year. But he's always insistent. Yeah, I mean, if you'd seen it, I thought, okay, I got him this year. But he always insisted that the players and the coaches prefer natural turf, so I finally gave up. So moved on to other things.
There you go. And you might have that little clip on repeat every holiday. I don't know.
Yeah. It got too repetitive. Too many years, and I just gave up. He knew the pitch.
So he knew the deal, yeah. Hey, you never know. He might come to you one day.
Right.
So I read an older interview with your partner, Andy Russell, and he described a deal that you did with a hauler in Chicago, and this may have been the one you were referring to that you did initially. And he mentioned how you said it was an easy deal, but he expanded on it to say that it wasn't an easy deal. You had to call the hauler every day, and you became like a son to him. So it wasn't necessarily easy to everyone else, especially since Waste Management tried to buy that company for 40 years. But he said that you just had the energy and the compassion to get it done. So with this industry being so tight-knit, do you think that special personal touch that you have is part of what makes you successful in this business?
Well, I think if you look at all the the guys who do a lot of acquisitions, like a guy like Rick Wojon at Waste Connections, Dave Call, Brian Bills, these guys, have been around. They'd all tell you the same thing, that it's very important to start with a personal connection. And I tend to really like the people that I have bought because I totally relate to their how they've come up from their bootstraps. Typically, they've started something, they've built it for a lot of years. I just really appreciate what they've done, and I'm sure that comes through. And because they've been successful, typically they usually have a lot going for them in the way of personality and other special skills, and so it's fun to be around them, and it's fun to get to know them. And I always try to work well with folks, and I never try to get the last scrap on the table in a deal. And I always tell folks that when we reach a letter of intent, now we're going to try to get the deal done. Tell them at that point we're actually now partners, because we're trying to get from here to the end, and we both have the same objective. And we're going to run into some things between here and the end that we're going to have to bob and weave to deal with, and we have to treat each other fairly. And I actually never feel like I ever really need a contract. Obviously, we have them, but we have almost never gone back after a deal and asked for anything or had any claims. I mean, I can count on part of a hand the number of times that's occurred in over 100 deals. So, it's been fun, and I think, persistence is obviously an important ingredient in any attempt to be successful. I always tell my kids, who are now old, but I always told them no is the invitation to begin the discussion. If you take no for an answer, you're not going to get very far. So, just staying with it, getting to know folks, enjoying them, being fair. I think that's an ingredient that all successful acquisitions guys have. I just cut a deal, and sold to Waste Connections to Rick Wojon and Jim Little. And, we did it over a glass of wine in about a half an hour. And, it goes to our sort of long-term relationship and friendship and trust. And,
right.
I think that's helpful.
Definitely. Well, that's fantastic. I love to hear that. So how do you think technology has affected the industry from your perspective?
Well, I think it's provided better information manage with, for one. So, the understanding your productivity, things of that sort's better. Obviously, the ability to track trucks, build more efficient routing, has been helpful to productivity. Things like obviously keeping track of your maintenance and preventative maintenance and repair and replacing parts and things of that sort. It's a kind of simple thing, but it's helpful. There are developing a lot of technologies and softwares to help be more efficient. Our software company, Dumpster Market, provides online ordering systems for folks. So, when we got started, only Waste Management and Republic could take orders online 24/7. Now we have dozens and dozens of companies that we've provided this online ordering system to. So instead of, if you see a typical roll-off company, they would say email or call us, on their website. Now you go to people who use our website capability that we provide them. You can go on an order 24/7, put your credit card up, sign terms and conditions. So it's a little pitch for us, but it's typical of there's just a lot of things developing to help companies be more efficient.
Definitely, and being customer focused, right? We're all getting accustomed to ordering when we want, where we want. So you're definitely accommodating that.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that you feel like the waste industry is stronger than it's been since you started. Do you think it'll continue, or do you feel headwinds are coming and changes are on the horizon?
I think the future industry is very bright. The industry's stood the headwinds of the downturn in the recycling, and kind of hasn't skipped a beat. The big companies are very disciplined, and let's face it, they are the leaders for everybody. So they're being disciplined. I think they're paying too much now, more than they'd like to. They know that. That's the market. With interest rates where they are, with their multiples where they are, they can pay 10x for something and it's accretive. But they also know, and most of those guys have been around, like Ron, first met Ron at Middlestad at Santa Fe in '93. These guys have been around, right? And they know, Don Slager, they know multiples go up and down. And I'm sure they just swallow a little bit hard paying what they seem to have to pay today. And they look for ways that they can improve those operations, bring with synergies, with pricing, with other advantages they can bring. So they bring the effective multiple down over time, but they'd certainly much rather buy hauling companies at 6 times than 8 to 10. So I think that's where the industry, when there is a recession, rates go up, possible. Things that would affect the multiples, the multiples will come down. I can't imagine they'll stay where they are forever. But that doesn't reflect the underlying strength in the industry, which is that, it's pretty oligarchic. People are making very good margins. They're being much safer. They're led by, strong, experienced leaders. Guys like John Cassell, obviously Slager, Jim Fish. Ron. These are really great leaders for the industry, and they're not crazy. You're not going to see accounting changes. You just, in the late '80s and '90s, there were so many, whether it's waste management chambers. Who knew what their numbers really were? now the numbers are solid. You've gone beyond, what is reasonable to consider the life of a landfill and amortizing airspace, and a lot of the technical issues, they've been resolved. And
Right.
I don't see anything particularly harmful to the industry. I will say that the roll-off business will suffer the next recession, and they've had a really good run, since '08, but they will suffer a bit, and then they'll come back. They'll come back after
Right.
that.
Right. You're right. I think this industry is very good at weathering storms, and will continue to do so.
Right.
So what advice would you give to young professionals who want to get into this industry?
Well, I think it's a great industry. I think it's something people can learn. I sort of tell my kids that it's best to own a business. Could they get in, learn, from the big guys, be an employee, learn skills on the ground, and get trained. And then if I was a person after I did that for 5 or 10 years and felt I knew the business, I'd go out and try to buy myself a hauling company. Starting, a hauling company is tough, not impossible. People start roll-off companies all the time, but to go into any kind of major city or even minor city and start a front-end business, a commercial business, very hard, because most of the big guys, and they're pretty much everywhere, have their customers under contract, and so you're sort of sitting around waiting for those contracts to expire. So it's very hard to start a business, but I think if you have the requisite skills, and you've developed those, and you have some knowledge, buying a small business and then growing that, if I was a young person, that's probably what I'd do.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. And then what else do you think we should be paying attention to in the world of waste recycling and organics?
The waste, I think the solid waste business is the one that, is going to continue to be open to sort of new tech, but, it's always tricky to build that. But new ideas to help make the industry more efficient, make it safer, I think are always welcomed by the industry.
Definitely. And to your point, they always seem to rise above it with the commodity pricing and the China ban and the issues around that. It seems it really breeds innovation, and we're starting to see a lot of that happen, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what keeps you busy outside of work? It sounds like, do you have 4 children?
4 kids, 25 to 31. They're spread out around the country, so we try to get to see them or get them together in Denver, Louisville, Boston, and New York. But so that, we don't have grandchildren yet, so that's something hopefully that'll keep us busy in the near future. And we'll travel a bit and play a little golf and do a little gardening, go skiing, sort of, whatever the season. But I do enjoy working. I do enjoy the industry. I'm not that young anymore, but I plan to keep busy in the business, and I'm looking for new opportunities all the time. So it's just been a lot of fun. I mean, just a lot of great folks in the industry, and I look forward to getting involved in more opportunities down the road. I am a partner in a group, two really smart guys from southwestern Pennsylvania, Nick Stork and Rich Walton, who founded a company called Archaea Energy, and it's a landfill gas business, but with some very interesting new twists on the traditional construction of landfill gas operations. And these guys are incredibly smart and really hardworking. They're relatively young. I can remember what it used to be like, but just having a lot of fun working with them and helping to build that company along with our software business, the dumpster market.
Right.
So I've 2 really great projects and companies to work with, and then but I could still see acquiring some solid waste businesses down the road.
Good for you. Wow, you've really touched every area of solid waste. It's fantastic to hear. And I can only imagine how many more stories you must have.
Could take days. You had that much time.
Well, thanks, Jeff. This has been fantastic, and I really appreciate you sharing your unique perspective with us today. And I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of it.
Enjoyed chatting with you too, Liz. Hope you have a great day.
Today's episode is brought to you by AMP Robotics. Did you know that AMP Robotics is transforming the economics of recycling using advanced artificial intelligence guided robots? Yep, the company's high-speed industrial robotics system, AMP Cortex, precisely automates the identification, sorting, and processing of material streams to extract maximum value for businesses that recycle municipal solid waste, e-waste, and construction and demolition materials. And the AMP Neuron AI platform operates AMP Cortex using advanced computer vision and machine learning to continuously train itself by processing millions of material images and adapting to changes in a facility's material stream. Plus, the AMP Insights web-based data management system captures all of this material stream data, providing insights and important alerts to operators so they can optimize their recycling business even more. And I've actually seen the system in action myself, and it's awesome to say the least. So go ahead and learn more at amprobotics.com.